Let's go to our panel now. Joanna Burch-Brown is a philosophy lecturer at the University of Bristol and a researcher on public memory of slavery and colonialism. And historian Amir Jamal Toure is a professor in the Africana Studies program at Savannah State University. We invited Cambridge University to have a representative on to the program, but it declined, unfortunately. Nevertheless, let's soldier on. Amir, Cambridge looking into whether it benefited from or encouraged slavery. Do we already know the answer to that question?
Well, we understand that England overall, Britain overall, benefited from the captivity of human beings because the businesses and the venture capitalists that were involved with regards to this from the 1700s, 1600s, coming to the 1800s, when finally they'll say, well, we need to stop it, but they still benefited from the Industrial Revolution. So again, there is a visceral connection, if not direct connection, when we look at Cambridge and other universities there and British society in general. So it's crucial for us, what I tell folks, to have what I call a worldwide or global healing and reconciliation with regards to the human trafficking that went on for some 400 years.
When you say, Amir, healing and reconciliation, does that also include possible reparations?
Well, that is another formula that comes into play. A part of that, some people are going to say reparations is a must. I think that, again, that is essential with regard to what we see happening in the Americas and in Europe, and in particular with regards to Britain. We look at communities that have been impacted by that. Again, from the wealth that was generated by human beings. Again, from the African continent throughout the entire Americas.
Joanna, should we be giving Cambridge some credit for looking into this in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that Cambridge is taking this initiative and is starting up this project. I think it's really important that we don't only look at the history, but we also give equal attention to looking at reparative measures. So it's about following through with concrete measures. And those concrete measures should really focus on addressing the root causes of inequality, and you know, they shouldn't just be benefiting the well-off.
At the very least, Joanna, would it put a dent in the West is best kind of philosophy that some people have and that everybody else is inferior? Would a more accurate or holistic view of history maybe just take some of the gloss away from, because especially when we see with these populist movements in Europe right now, they have this view of the past where everything was wonderful and it became worse because of this globalized world. So at the very least, would that be a victory?
You know, I think we're going through this global process right now of looking at our history again and telling the untold stories and looking at the history from the grassroots up. And that's really painful for communities as they're looking at history. They want to feel proud. You know, we all want to feel really proud of our histories. But I think it's about, you know, loving your community is also about taking responsibility for the mistakes that have been made and for the injustices that have happened. And that's an expression of love for your community. And it's actually a way of helping to heal the injuries that have been caused by this history.
Amir Jamal Toure, there'd be some who say, well, you know, all history and all institutions have blood on their hands. You won't be able to appreciate a historic cathedral or a mosque or a palace without knowing for sure that perhaps thousands of slaves built it and maybe hundreds of them died in the process of building it. So if you start with one, you have to address all of them. Is that an endeavor worth taking?
Yeah, absolutely, because we deal with, I tell folks, we deal with mythology often. And we call it history, but in fact, it is mythology. And then again, when you think about West is best, again, those type of notions are incorrect because it's been used to minimize people, to dehumanize people. And then we stand on the backs of those folks, and we need to rectify that. We need to correct that. I tell folks, you go to Liverpool, they had great warehouses in Liverpool. And people not knowing anything about it who live right there in England, in Britain, not understand that, again, it's tied to the full story. And you have minimized the story of other people on the continent. Africa was called the Dark Continent. So you can justify and rationalize abusing these folks and abusing the entire continent, raping the entire continent of its wealth, of this intellectual wealth, taking it away and not taking it to the Americans, and then you can reap a benefit from it. But then you don't want to acknowledge it. But you want to dehumanize the people and say that, no, they have always been like this. No, when that's incorrect. We need to be at the table of humanity as equals. And that's the way that we can rectify and get to the table of humanity, sitting there as equals and listen to all of us.
Joanna, are people talking to each other? Because people don't seem to be having much dialogue here. When we look at history, there seems to be those who are the sort of traditional historians who are saying, oh, come on, Cecil John Rhodes was a man of his time, leave his statue up, and others saying he was a terrible person, take it down, right? So you have those who are part of the decolonization movement and their approach to history, and those who are saying, oh, you guys, we have real problems in the world. This would have no tangible benefit. It won't help starving people. So where are we in this battle of ideas, and why aren't people talking to each other?
I think that's a great question. Here in Bristol, we've been having a really amazing conversation over the past few years. And it's led to a huge amount of conversation and discussion on the ground. One of the things that I've really appreciated that Mike Norton has said, he's the editor of the Bristol Post, and he said, this is a topic where everybody's on transmit and nobody's on receive. And I think that's absolutely right. I think it's one of those topics where, for whatever reason, it's very difficult, whatever view you come to it with, it can be quite difficult to think that the other side is anything other than irrational and immoral. But actually, as you listen to other views and you get a better sense of what's actually behind people, there are shared values, and I think that this is something where we really need to be approaching it with an open mind and open spirit. Right. One of the things I've done in my research in Bristol is to, so I was involved in a campaign called the Countering Colston campaign, which has tried to challenge the way in which the city's memorialized Edward Colston in order to open up a much wider conversation about the historical injustices and also about inequalities today. And one of the things I've done is to look at then letters that have come into the Bristol Post about the Colston debates, and to try to really unpack what people on different sides believe. Right. And there's some really common objections that people have. So people feel this is that the history isn't relevant today. And I think a lot of people don't understand actually the relevance of the history today. They don't understand the ways in which so many of the inequalities that we have today are legacies of this history. They say there's an injustice to a great Bristolian. They say that there's a slippery slope. So once you challenge one building, name, or whatever, one figure, you've got to go and do the same for all of them. I actually think that different institutions serve different functions, and that a lot can be accomplished by starting the conversation, looking critically in one place, and then seeing what creatively develops from there. So in Bristol, one of the things that we're doing at University of Bristol is that we are going to have a permanent position. We're going to be appointing somebody to a permanent position. The first thing they're going to be responsible for is looking into the history of the university's connections to slavery. And we already know that there are a lot. So we already know that 85% of the initial endowments that set up the university came from enslaved labor. We know that the 4 families who are represented in the seal of the university were all connected to slavery. So we know that this is part of our history, and we have a responsibility to look at it, and the university is really stepping up to that now.
Yeah. Amir, Jamal, Toure, just enough time for me to ask you your opinion on one specific piece of information that came out of Cambridge University. Even though they're conducting this review right now, something they've already done at St. Catherine's College is they've removed this bell because there's a high likelihood that it came from a slave plantation, right? And so there was some pressure and some protests, and they've removed this bell. And I wonder what you think about that, like whether it was the right idea to remove the bell, as they've done, or maybe if it would have been a better idea for them to keep up the bell, but to put up a plaque and say, this bell came from a slave plantation. Slavery was bad. This is why it was bad. We benefited from it, and so on. Which would be the better solution?
Well, with regards to myself, I would say that you can put it up. You can still have it right there. But as you threw out there, have an explanation and give a rationalization with regards to why this is incorrect. Why we are now addressing this right now, because in our society today, we understand that we are evolving. We're evolving with regards to thinking. And so, yes, this is a part of the evolution, saying that this is what we can no longer return back to. We have to acknowledge our past to understand our present and our future. The healing must come about, and that's by us acknowledging what is going on and not being afraid, not having any fear.
Amir Jamal Toure and Joanna Burch-Brown, I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers.